sharp, that's when the signal shines in. Got the mic set up and the camera spin. Grab a coffee, pull up your chair, join the drive. 'Cause the only place to be on a Monday night at 9 is right here, alive. We're drilling down deep on the legend of fur, the biggest mystery ever did stir. It's Sasquatch Watch Radio. Tune into the same with Garry Kendrick hosting with King. He's heard the howls, he's caught the form's trace, a true seeker leading the chase. Something stirs out in the shadowy wood. Let's uncover it together, just like we should. The team is geared up, the map is laid clear. We bring expert voices where the facts appear. We feature top names on this digital plane, from Meldrum's big theories to Strange Rich Strain. With Lyle Blackburn and Scott Violet online, we chase the elusive one sighting at a time. It's Sasquatch Watch Radio. Tune into the screen with Garry Kendrick, host of the scene. He's heard the howls, he's seen the dark form, a true eyewitness leading the storm. Something is lurking out in the dark wood. Let's find it together, just like we should. We give you the legends, the truth laid raw, and a unique track for the tale of the law. So subscribe to the channel, heed the lead. We're planting knowledge, pulling up the weed. Yeah, Monday night, 9 Eastern, YouTube Live. Sasquatch Watch Radio, where the quest thrives.
Everybody, tonight is Monday night, November the 17th, 2025, and you're watching Sasquatch Watch Radio. Appreciate everybody for tuning in tonight. Tonight's going to be a little bit different show. I kind of titled tonight's show is Beyond Bigfoot. That's where I'm going to feel some of my own personal kind of thoughts and things about Sasquatch as we go. I guess I probably should have title it, Gary's Gone Nuts, but just take it as it comes. First thing I wanted to talk about tonight was, and I've got several pages of notes, so if you're paper rattling, that's just me. I spoke about it a few times, and it's a theory that I really think kind of holds a lot of water, but I don't know if there's a lot of science behind it yet. But it is the uncanny valley theory of evolution. And the uncanny valley theory of evolution is a deep-rooted fear of things that look human but are not. And it was first coined in the 1970s by a Japanese roboticist, and I'm probably going to butcher his name pretty bad here, Masahiro Morei. And anyway, in the 1970s, he found that the more human-like a robot or some type of image like that became, that people felt empathy for it. But that was only to a certain point, and once it reached a certain point, the emotions changed and it became more like revulsion and fear. And it was not just the robots, it's like other things. It's like CGI images, AI images, wax figures. People have a natural fear of that. What it boils down to is it's kind of a deep-seated human emotion, and anyway, it's kind of a like an instinct almost. And they believe where it comes from is that Homo sapiens did not, just inherit an empty earth. All human species spent a lot of time on this planet. At one point, there were 7 species that existed at the same time. And those species, more than likely, like everything else to survive, may have preyed upon each other. People will say, "Oh, well, there's no record of that in the wild of animals preying on each other," but there really is. Bears will feed on each other. Wild hogs will feed on each other. There's all kinds of things that will feed on each other. But at one point, and I'll just use a simple thing. Everybody talks about Paranthropus in the Bigfoot world. Okay, there was 2 species of Paranthropus. One lived in I think it was like the northeast section of Africa. One lived in South Africa. They existed at the same time as a Homo species that was, I believe, Homo habilis. And Homo habilis may have had Paranthropus prey on its young. And it goes on and on and on. There's records of Neanderthal bones with cut marks on them. There's records of Homo sapien bones with cut marks on them. Even in modern humans, cannibalism is a thing. So anyway, they think that this fear in this uncanny valley of human evolution, of things that look human but aren't quite human, comes from something preying upon our ancestors. And that would really make sense because, a lot of people in their Bigfoot encounters mentions that, hey, I was, paralyzed by the sight of this thing. And that would explain some of the people's reactions too, like even in my own encounter, which I'm sure you guys are probably sick of hearing about. But anyway, there's like 2 different reactions when you see one. The first reaction is an interest reaction. I want to see it. I want to study it. I want to know what's going on with it. Anything like that. The other reaction is a complete shutdown. It's overwhelming fear and a complete shutdown. That type of reaction tends more into this uncanny valley of human evolution. And people have that reaction. So like I said, I don't really know how much science is into this theory of this uncanny valley, but I think it has a lot of merit to it. And like I said, we're going beyond Bigfoot. This is theories and things like that I go on. Another thing, too, that I kind of want to get into is, I have a lot of people on the show that, are from different thought groups. And the reason that I have people on the show from different thought groups is because I want the full spectrum of the show. I want people to see, any and every aspect of what the Bigfoot phenomena is. We've got pretty much, that's one of the reasons why I asked. That's where I get the question, animal, mineral, or vegetable, that I do on the show all the time. Is there's basically 3 groups. One is an aper, people that believe it is, just typically a living, breathing animal. I fall into that group myself. But, I'm open-minded enough that I will listen to everybody's encounter and everybody's, what they have, their situations. The other is the, portals and interdimensional travel and extraterrestrial Bigfoot. Okay. The third is the spiritual, I don't necessarily follow the last 2 because they kind of dip into, experiences that I haven't had with Sasquatch. And I base, my theories and everything else strictly on my own research and my own experiences. I can't superimpose myself into somebody else's encounter or somebody else's experience because I wasn't there. And that goes along too when everybody has, the red circles. Oh, look here, there's 14 Bigfoot. Here's one, here's one, here's one, here's one. Okay, there may have been 14 Bigfoot in that photo. I wasn't there. My perspective of the photo is completely different. Most of these photos with the red circles are taken at what appears to be a great distance. So, I really don't have any real thoughts as to what was there, what wasn't there, because I wasn't there. And I can't, like I said, I can't superimpose myself into that. So, with all that being said, I just kind of want to get into something that's kind of my own personal deal and why I listen to the animal, the mineral, and the vegetable part of Sasquatch. Is that by definition, paranormal is a event or phenomenon that are beyond the scope of normal scientific understanding. So if it's events and phenomenon that's beyond the scope of normal scientific understanding, then strictly by definition, Sasquatch is paranormal. And according to the definition, we have a lot of things that separate the groups out. Okay, if somebody comes on the show and they're part of the woo group, as everybody calls it, that's fine, so long as they have something interesting to talk about, so long as they have some hard facts or something like that. That's wonderful. I'm all in for it. I find that a lot of things that people call the woo, I can explain with, a little bit of science and some understanding of nature and how nature works. I am a hunter. I'm an outdoorsman, so I have an understanding of things like that. And Mick says here, I'll read this one for you, Mick. I've always wanted to ask about the mineral or vegetable part of that. I can't seem to square with how those apply to Sasquatch. Well, like I said, Mick, if it has bearing on what we're studying, we need to listen to everybody. Like I said, there's 3 basic groups to Sasquatch. And, realistically, in my own personal opinion and my own personal feelings, there should only be one group, and that's Sasquatch research. Not, I won't listen to anybody that's paranormal or you ape guys are crazy or, everybody's nuts, it's spiritual. We should all be together in this and work together on things. And I do agree, I have a hard time with some of the woo stuff, but that's the things that we need to listen to because we don't have a definitive definition as to what we're dealing with. And, like I said, in my own core thoughts, I believe it's an animal based strictly upon, what I've seen. Now, I may get some heat for this, in the comments later on, but that's why, based on my experiences. I found footprints. I've seen hair samples. I've heard calls that can't be explained by anything in nature. Good example, my wife went out to walk our dogs this evening, and as soon as she went out the door, she started pecking on the window hard. So I go to see what's going on, and you can hear this screaming coming from the lower end of our property. And it was a fox. My wife has never heard a fox scream before. So she was completely tore up. She didn't know what it was. So that's what I'm saying. We all need to work together. Yeah, that's a good point, David. You've never seen, David says here, I can pull it up. David says, I've never seen a Sasquatch, but I wonder how many have seen me. And I'll just tell you right now, David, for real, probably a lot. uh, we're dealing with something that's out there. It is, the forest, the swamps, things like that. That is its, primary environment. So, that's where it comes from. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of times, that's like I've always said. I've seen a few bobcats, out in the woods hunting, but I've wondered often, how many have seen me and I didn't know it. Let's see here. Mick's got another one up here. Okay, let's pull this up here. I hear you, but mineral refers specifically to something that Sasquatch isn't. Similarly, Sasquatch are vegetables pretty kind. Like I said, Mick, that's just something that I think, is important that we all get together and just work together as a group and to study it. And like I said, by definition, Sasquatch is paranormal. Some other definitions that I kind of wanted to get into that I'll probably take some heat for here. Evidence, and this comes from the Collins Dictionary online. Evidence is anything that you see, read, or are told that cause you to believe something is true or has really happened. That's strictly from the Collins definition. And trace evidence, and this is from the National Institute of Justice. So this refers more to like police activity and stuff, but it works in the Bigfoot field too. Small pieces of material transferred between people, objects, and even the environment that is evidence during a crime. This evidence can help investigators develop leads, exclude potential suspects, and locations for further security. Trace evidence encompasses a wide range of natural and manufactured materials. Now, you'll hear a lot of people talk about evidence and trace evidence. And then there's physical evidence. Physical evidence refers to tangible items that can be perceived through the senses and used to provide facts in legal cases. Collins Dictionary again. So with all that being said, what we're looking at, there is no real answer to what we have as far as Sasquatch goes. We're all working, to hopefully one day prove that, what we're all looking for is real. I think that's what every researcher at their core is really about. We just want to prove that what we, and I'll just go out on a limb. I speak for myself. I just want to prove that what I saw is what I saw. I have no other explanation for it. I've told several people that I can't tell you 100% that I saw a Sasquatch. I will tell you 100% what I did not see, and that was a person or a bear. The size didn't match. The gait didn't match. The environment wasn't, right. But, with all that being said, we're all looking for the same thing. When it comes to evidence, we need to work better. We need to work smarter as a group. Okay. And that includes everybody, including me and any other researchers out there. When we're collecting evidence, we need to be cleaner about our evidence collection. We need to try to maintain a sterile field. I'll go back to the show where I spoke to Randy Harrington. The evidence that he collected with his hair sample was they used sterile tweezers. They used a sterile tube to put the hairs in. Nobody touched anything. That's one thing. We need to work harder at maintaining our evidence. So by maintaining our evidence is, okay, I have a hair sample. And this is something that's taught, through the prison where I worked at, was a chain of evidence. Okay. I have this evidence. I collected it, used sterile utensils, whatever, put it up. I pass it off to this person. We need to keep a chain of who has had contact with that evidence. What that's going to do is that's going to help eliminate cross contamination and loss. It's happened in Sasquatch research as long as people's been researching. We had this evidence. It's been lost. We found these footprints. We casted them. We passed them on to this person. We passed it on to this person. It's lost. So we need to try to keep in mind. That's a good point, Mick. Mick just mentioned not to use plastic, but to use envelopes instead of plastic baggies. Hair will degrade. DNA on hair will degrade rapidly in a plastic bag. And I'm here to tell you what, I was 100% guilty of that. I would put stuff in plastic bags. I carried plastic bags in my evidence collection kit. That's the thing. And as far as the chain of custody goes, where we keep that evidence, it needs to be controlled. We all work in different groups. I'm a member of the Sasquatch Watch of Virginia. And, everybody deals with these different groups. So with dealing with these different groups, we need to maintain this chain of evidence to control what evidence that we have, to keep it all in one central location. If we get a hit on a hair sample and they say, hey, yeah, we want to look at it, we need to be able to go to that hair sample, pull it straight, and pass it on and write down who you passed it on to. That way, if something does happen, you know where the breakdown was. And with that being said, too, you may only collect 2 or 3 hairs at a time. In collecting those 2 or 3 hairs at a time, when somebody asks for, hey, send me that hair so we can examine it, I'm going to make the suggestion that maybe we don't send it all off at one time. We're all excited for this discovery. Everybody wants to know, what we're dealing with. But if we send off all of the evidence that we have, if something happens and they say, okay, yes, this is definitive, this is this, you have nothing at all to send back for a second review of the evidence. It's always best to do a double-blind study. And if you give up all the evidence that you have, then you have nothing to, follow up with. So you may get a unknown species of primate from the first review of the evidence, and then you may get human contamination in the second evidence. Okay, that's fine. Now you're stuck in the middle. Now, if you send out all the evidence to the first person, you can never get a second show. If you send it all off, to 2 different people, then you don't have anything to follow up with a third. And it's hard, like I said, because we may only get 2 or 3 hairs at a time. Mick says my audio's cutting out. I'm sorry. The internet's not been good this evening. Am I coming in clear now, Mick? Sweet. Good deal. Okay, and as far as evidence go, we're all out there looking for real evidence. Okay. We all have leads on evidence. We all have footprints. We have hair, scat, possible videos, blood samples. All of this is evidence. Whether it's evidence, trace evidence, physical evidence, whatever. And we all have it. And some of it is even hoaxed. But even with hoaxed evidence, we still learn something, which is the important thing. No matter what happens in our evidence collection, so long as we are learning something from that, whether it be a better collection method, whether it's a better chain of custody, whether it's a better storage, or whatever. Even with the hoaxed evidence, we're still learning something. You know, I guess anything that somebody hoaxes, and I will never understand a hoax. You know, it's hard enough in this community to try to prove what we're all trying to prove, because there's nothing out there that we can really compare it to. And why people want to hoax things, you know, I'll never understand. But anyway, like I said, with a hoax, we can use it to find, you know, better methods, more scientific methods, better ways of doing things. And, you know, even with the evidence that we do have, if we continue to work towards it, we can, you know, find the truth. And I think, like I said, I think at my core, that's what we're all looking for, is the truth. And like I said, no matter what camp that you come from, whether it's the animal camp, the interdimensional extraterrestrial camp, the spiritual camp, whatever, we all want that proof. And I don't think anybody's feelings are going to be hurt when it comes out, you know, that Sasquatch is this. You know, people are all going to be excited about the discovery. And I think basically that's what we need to work for. As investigators, we need to work better together to come to that discovery. And this is another one too. I could probably write a book about this. I come from a small town in Southwest Virginia. I live right on the border between Virginia and Kentucky. I'm right in the heart of the Bible Belt. People that are religious do not, you know, necessarily go in for Bigfoot. So we're all at a disadvantage there. Now, things are actually kind of changing here, where people will begin to speak to you about, you know, their experiences and things like that. But they all want to refer back to the Bible. And actually, I'll tell you what I'm going to do before I get into this one. We have a song for tonight. And I'm going to play that song because we're just about at the halfway point. And right now will be a good time for it, because this next one is going to be a pretty lengthy thing. So we'll get into that. If I can. All right here we go, guys.
From the microphone station, where the shadows draw long, sits a researcher, determined and strong. He's Garry Kendrick, the host of the air, on Sasquatch Watch Radio, showing that he cares. He's known in the field for the focus he brings on the beast in the woods and the secrets it sings. He won't chase the drama, he won't get involved. He's here for the mysteries that must be resolved. He walks the estuary trail where the signal is clear. He puts the creature first, letting the truth draw near. It's about the wonder and the science, the tracks on the ground, leaving the gossip and the bitterness unbound. No room for the conflict, the feuds on the screen. He's here for the pure search, space in between. He's Garry Kendrick, holding steady the line for honest research and a purpose divine. He talks theories evolving, what he sees and he thinks, from the stride of the primate to the blink as it shrinks, from the camera's bright eye But that's not all he'll discuss. He's fighting the fakes that are coming for us. He'll tell you the secret, the digital stain, how to spot AI-made photos that bring all the pain. It keeps it down to earth, keeps the discussion clean. A host of integrity, a code to convene. He's an interviewer, listening close to the guest, not worried about fame, just putting their story to the test. It's not the personalities, the rivalries wide. It's a subject of Bigfoot, where the answers reside. He chooses the curiosity over the brawl, hoping that respectful talk conquer them all. He walks the S2025 trail, where the signal is clear. He puts the creature first, letting the truth draw near. It's about the wonder and the science, the tracks on the ground, leaving the gossip and the bitterness unbound. No room for the conflict, the feuds on the screen. He's here for the pure search, the space in between. He's Garry Kendrick, holding steady the line for honest research and a purpose divine. So tune in to Garry and lend him your ear. Beyond Bigfoot, he's looking for the truth that is near. No drama, no fuse, just the facts and the clues.
All right, that was a good one. I'm just going to say right here, David and Mick both know exactly where I'm going with this next one. I'm going to be speaking on Genesis chapter 6, verse 4. And I'll just go ahead and read what it says here. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The son became mighty men, which were of old, men of great renown. Okay, I don't get into religion much. Okay, the reason I don't get into religion much is really, it doesn't really pertain to the subject that, this show revolves around. I try to stick to, the Sasquatch theme in all things. With that being said, I ruled out Nephilim as a possible suspect for Sasquatch. And the reason that I ruled out the Nephilim for being, Sasquatch is based entirely upon the biblical description of giants. They were men of great renown. It does not say that they were giants that were covered in hair. It doesn't say that they were animal-like. It doesn't say that they were anything other than men of great renown. And with that being said, it doesn't say that there was any link between what we're looking for and the giants that they depict in that. If you go back into the stories and things like that in the Bible, basically the biblical truth comes down to they were giant humans with great strength, great power. David and Goliath. Goliath was probably a descendant of the Nephilim. It doesn't say that, Goliath was hairy and covered in fur and everything like that. One of the questions that David brought up And I'm going to have to scroll back here a little bit and get it up. If I can find it. Right here. Adam and Eve had 2 sons, Cain and Abel. They had a lot more. That's the 2 that, we all know about. And they married and had children. Did they marry other hominoid species? No, David, I don't think so. I think they actually intermarried, their sisters and brothers and things like that. There is one case after the first murder, Cain and Abel. It speaks about Cain went into the wilderness and he found a wife in the land of Nod. I have no clue what the land of Nod is, anything else like that, but it says that he found a wife in the land of Nod. Could that have been another humanoid species? Very possible. We really don't know. We really don't know. View great now. Yeah, that's Ray Mosley brought up the point here. It says it's hard to be of great renown if you're hard to find. Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's definitely true. The next point that I want to get into is kind of it's going to be touch and go with some people, but why don't we have more scientists researching the subject? Well, there's a lot of reasons. Fear, losing accreditation. I think that's the biggest thing that scientists are afraid of is, it's going to be hard to say, but some of us kind of get into some kooky things, me included. Okay. I'm not going to leave myself out, me included. I try to speak my mind. I try to do what things are right. I try to do what's proper. But we all get into some of the strangest things, I'm not going to point fingers and name names. I've never had Bigfoot come to me and ask for garlic. I've never had one, mind speak to me or anything like that. I can't even say that I've ever heard one speak English. Anyway, with that being said, when it comes to scientists have one thing and one thing only, and that is their reputation. Okay, if they lose their reputation, they have lost everything that they had. Nobody wants to be ridiculed, especially by people of science. There's nothing that hurts their feelings more than when you have what you 100% think is Sasquatch evidence and you send it to, and I don't want to say an expert because there is no experts on Sasquatch, but you send it to a scientist who's, got all these credentials and all these big initials behind their name and all this other stuff, and your evidence comes back to be, bear or a horse or some other known animal. So, with that feeling, you're on this big high, you've got this evidence that you've worked so hard for, and you've really buckled down and did your due diligence and everything's right, and then it comes back as a black bear, or it comes back as your neighbor's horse or something like that. You get that sick feeling down in the pit of your stomach, oh my God, everybody's going to think I'm an idiot. And everything. It's the same way with the scientists. And, we have had some really hardcore scientists that are out there that have done this. Another one too, Dr. Meldrum. He was a great scientist, and he really put his credibility on the line for this. And, if a scientist loses that credibility, they could lose money to start with for research projects that they've got going on. There's really no scientist that's out there that is 100% dedicated to Sasquatch. All of us have jobs. We all have to work. We all have to provide a living for our families and ourselves and everything else. But with this ridicule, they could lose their credibility. They lose their research projects. They can lose their jobs. Dr. Meldrum worked at a lab. He worked for a college, everything else like that. He could have lost every bit of that. And, there's so many hoaxes out there that it's easy for scientists to say this is all just a bunch of BS. This is all a bunch of people out there hoaxing. This is all a bunch of, I'll just use myself for an example. A bunch of rednecks out there in the woods running around trying to find something that doesn't look there. And, the thing of it is we all need that scientific research to go along with our investigations to prove what we're out there after is real. And it's hard to prove that when you have so many hoaxes, when you have so many, quirky ideas. I try to stick to the facts in my research. When you stick strictly to the facts, no matter what those facts are, you're going to find a trail that will lead you somewhere. Even if the facts may not fit into the box that you have prepared for your thoughts on Sasquatch, by following the evidence, following the trails, paying attention to the witnesses, you can spot a hoaxer. And some of us are way better at it than others. We've all been tricked. There's no doubt about that in my mind. We've all been tricked. Everybody's fell victim to a hoax that's done any honest research into Bigfoot. But with that happening, you develop a better understanding of what to look for in a report. One of the things that I use to, go through evidence and things like that, I actually stole from a guy named T.C. Tolman. Toby, if you're out there, buddy, you've helped me out a lot. I use a 49-50 ratio. I have to be 49% sure that what I'm looking at could be a hoax. And I have to be 50% sure or 51% sure that it's not a hoax. If it's the other way around, if I'm 51 that it could be a hoax and 49 that it's not, I'm not going to investigate it because the chance is too high that it's hoax. If we all took a little more time and paid a little more attention to, what we're looking at and things like that, we'll get better evidence. Like I said, even if it doesn't fit into the box, let's say somebody says that they saw Bigfoot cloaking. Okay. I'm a hunter. I am out in the woods. I deer hunt. Me and my son and my father-in-law just came back from West Virginia last week from hog hunting. Things like that. Now, we're going to take a white-tailed deer, for example. If you take a white-tailed deer and it's out in the woods, right? They're brown. We all know what they look like. They're brown. They can take 2 steps into the forest, and even trained eyes, hunters, will lose them in that split second that they step into the trees. They have the exact color patterns that they need to camouflage themselves from predators, from people, from anything. So that's where I get the thing that cloaking may not necessarily be a physical cloaking like the Predator. Everybody's seen that movie. It may not necessarily be that the Bigfoot, cloaked and shimmered out and disappeared. It could just be that it's camouflaged enough that it stepped into the forest and you just couldn't see it anymore. And then 2 people's minds will play a lot of tricks on them. People will see something and it not necessarily be what it is that they're seeing, but they think it is. Now, I'm going to use myself again because I'm a good example. Hunting, almost every hunter out there has had this happen to them. They've sat there and watched a stump for 3 hours, waiting on it to raise its head because they know it's that big buck that they've looked at. So that's the thing that I'm talking about. If we take these reports and, if it is kind of credible, let's say they do have some woo things in it, for, example. Oh, I saw it. It cloaked out. Well, they have pictures of footprints. They have, good. And when I say pictures of footprints, I mean good pictures of footprints, something for scale. We all know what to look for in a footprint. But they have all that, and then it just stood there and it just like shimmered out and was gone. Okay. Like I said, maybe their brain just kind of got overwhelmed for a minute. Human mind is wonderful, but it can overload. It's like a computer. You can fit so much in, there's only so much information you can fit in it. And if what you're seeing doesn't necessarily fit into your mind, then you can't deal with it. You'll lose it. And Mick just brought up that point right here. I'll go ahead and read this for you. I can't buy the cloaking stories. I think it has more to do with the human's mind, natural ability to override traumatic events until they can deal with it. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. If you can take your reports and condense down and get to the core of what that report is about. There was footprints. There's been disturbances in the trees, whatever. And they said, oh, it cloaked out. Well, maybe their mind just kind of got jumbled. Maybe it stepped back into the forest. I actually have kind of a little funny thing that, I call it the Homer Simpson. Anybody that's watched The Simpsons know how Homer can lean back into that hedge and just disappear, I think a lot of that happens to people that experience Sasquatch. It does kind of just lean back into the forest and kind of just disappears because it is camouflaged that good. We've all heard and seen evidence, hair samples and things like that the hair is multiple colors. One strand of hair might be 2 or 3 different colors. And that is just a natural camouflage. I'll go back to Bob and Kathy Strain. We've had both of them on the show. Wonderful people. Bob stepped into that little ditch and he was looking for the 2 Sasquatch that his wife had saw. And there was 2 logs laying there. And he, didn't see any of the Bigfoot. And then when he went back the next day to check that little ditch again, those logs weren't there. That was probably the 2 Sasquatch laying in that ditch. Okay. I'm a United States Marine, and I'm very proud of being a United States Marine. And I have seen some big guys, some of them well over 200 pounds, that can camouflage out and you will never see them. You will never hear them. They just more or less vanish. And that's a lot of training and a lot of skill. Okay, now we can take that and put that in play. It wouldn't be that hard to believe that Sasquatch just kind of stepped back into the woods and you just can't see him anymore. I'm sorry, I'm reading a thing here. Yeah, that's a good point. Mick brings up another good point. I like having Mick on the show. The human brain is a bioelectrical organ, and it is so complicated that it sometimes overrides reality. That's why some people seem insane. They can't discern what they experienced. And yeah, that's true. And then with a lot of that being said too, not everybody that sees Sasquatch is familiar with their surroundings. We have a lot of people that say, oh, first time I ever went out in the woods, I saw one. Okay. They're not familiar with, the what's out there. One of the things that I like to say is we do have a lot of, Bigfoot encounters that are, misidentified. It was a black bear. It was, something else. And that happens specifically because people don't have a frame of reference to work with. Now, that's with anything. There's a lot of animals out there that, if you've never seen them, heard them, or anything else, are super scary to hear. An elk has an incredible sound. Incredible sound. Red stag, European red stag, they actually roar when they call. And if you don't know what it is, you have no frame of reference to put that in. That was a monster screaming at you. There's birds that make unusual calls. I was on an expedition once, and people had heard what they described as a pissed off monkey. And I was like, I didn't hear that. And he's like, yeah, everybody heard it. And I was like, I don't know what happened. I never heard that. But the next day, when we heard an owl calling, it was a barred owl. They said, there it is. It sounds like a pissed off monkey. And I said, nope, that's a barred owl. So, without that frame of reference, you really don't know what that is. You kind of have to make up your own mental assumptions as to what you saw. And sometimes those people's mental assumptions are not correct. And then sometimes those people's mental assumptions, it may have been a Bigfoot. They just have no frame of reference to put in to describe to you what they saw, what they heard, anything else like that. Bob Gimlin even admitted that, he underestimated the height of Patty to start with because he was on horseback. And that kind of threw off his frame of reference. He said he didn't think it was that big. And then he said, a big man, 300 pounds is a huge man. He said, that's what I thought at first, it's 300 pounds. Probably way heavier than that because he didn't have a frame of reference to put that in. So that's something that we all need to, kind of work with more, a frame of reference. How big was it? How do you measure it? Like in my own encounter, the Sasquatch that I saw was really, really close. I mean, my front bumper was almost touching it. So that put it just about 3 feet from where I was sitting at. And it was probably 3.5 feet taller than the top of the Jeep that I was driving. So that was my frame of reference. If you can get a frame of reference, that's something good to work with. The human mind is notorious for kind of skewing what it's seen as far as height, weight, things like that. In an open field, it's really hard to tell how big something is. You can say, oh, yeah, Jesus, it was huge, man. It was this tall. But when you get out there and you get to looking around, there's no point of reference. There's no trees to measure it against. There's no, you don't know how tall the grass is or whatever. That's some of the things that, we need to get into as far as our evidence goes. Okay, they said it was probably 8 feet tall. The grass was, probably 3 feet high in this field. But the creature, the grass came up to its waist. So it couldn't have been 8 feet tall. You see what I'm saying? Let's see here. I got another comment here. Yeah, that is a good point, too. There, Ray Moses said, before moving to Tennessee, he lived in a swamp and he hunted everything that he ate for years. And you figure out wildlife pretty quickly if you're outside a lot. That's true. But, Ray, with that being said, too, we have a lot of what I call internet researchers, which the internet is a good source of information. And it's also a bad source of information at the exact same time. And I'll say this too, may get a lot of heat for this too. But I think TV shows and things like that too really kind of obscure what actual Sasquatch research looks like. 90% of the time you're sitting in a chair talking to somebody else and there's absolutely nothing happening. Now there's 10% of the time when, man, it's hot. And I'm here to tell you when when it's on, it's on. You'll know. I've been to one property here in Virginia that every time we was there, we had activity. And I mean, when you had that activity on that property, it was one thing after the other, just as, hard as you could get it. And I was still kind of new into the whole investigation and things like that. I wish I would have sat down and wrote things down as they happened and had a better outlook as to, how things happened, what time they happened, what happened, who seen it, who heard it, what we smelled, what the environment was like. But, I wasn't kind of as educated into it as I am now. I do take a lot of notes now. So that's, kind of how we all need to work at things. If we do research better, then our research will be better. And hopefully we can get that scientific backing that we need. Another thing that I want to talk about is hoaxing. Okay, like I said, we've all been hoaxed. Everybody's had a hoax pulled on them and things like that. We all know that one researcher that hoaxes everything. Okay. And everybody says, and I don't care what camp in Sasquatch you come from, whether you're a living animal, whether you're interdimensional extraterrestrial, whether you're spiritual, whatever. Everybody gets mad when somebody hoaxes something. If we can get away from that, if we can start pointing out this is crap, then we can get away from all this stuff about, not getting scientists involved because nobody wants to try to research something that might be BS to start with, because we do have all these hoaxes. If you're a researcher and you're out there hoaxing stuff, everything you may have had a genuine encounter, but everything that you hoaxed kind of washes out that good encounter that you had, because now nobody can believe anything that you've said, because you've proven to the rest of us that you're faking things. So, when it comes to hoaxes, we need to dig in, and instead of trying to hoop and holler and scream and point fingers and say, hey, this person's hoaxing, hey, this person's hoaxing, hey, this person's hoaxing, just leave it alone, step away from it. You're not doing any good by pointing fingers and hollering or getting on the internet and typing a bunch of, hateful emails to this person or whatever. Step away from it. If you have any type of research going on and that person wants in on it, the answer would be no. Because you don't want that contamination in your research. We all need to stay ahead of these hoaxes. And with AI being out there, just about every video now is going to be in question. I've seen some really, really good ones, and they've been hard to nail down. Somebody sent me one and said, hey, what do you think about this? And I bet I watched that Joker 30, 40 times. And it had everything that I look for in a film, all in this little AI thing. The way that it walked, its movement, the look and everything else. The only way that I caught it was I slowed the video down. And in one part where it was walking, instead of its foot being on top of a rock, its foot was actually under the rock. So, that's something too. And then there was another one that come out, and I think it's hit 2 or 3 states now, and I think I've mentioned this on the show once before. When I first seen it, I believe it was Michigan, and they said the DNR had actually said that this was, this was actual Bigfoot evidence. They had a hair sample, they had footprints, they had video from 2 separate night vision drones that had video of it, and they had closed down this section of the forest and all this other stuff. Well, as soon as I heard about that, I instantly went to the Michigan DNR website. Now, if they've closed down a section of forest, that's going to be listed on there. If they've said, yeah, we've got video evidence of Sasquatch being in our forest, that's going to be on there. There was nothing on it whatsoever. I'm saying, when these hoaxes come up, that should be the first thing that we're all doing. Instead of debating what's going on, let's start looking at things. Let's start, finding out what's real and what's not. That's a good point, Mick. That's a good point. He's talking about Paul Freeman. Freeman was unfairly tarred as a hoaxer. We simply wanted to confirm whether it was possible to fool critics. It was a controlled experience, but everyone freaked out on him. I'll say this too, and I've heard Dr. Meldrum speak about this. Him and I can't remember who he was with, was going to pay Paul Freeman a visit, and it was an unannounced visit. He didn't have any clue that anybody was coming up there, and they wanted to, see some of the footprints. And he told them where some of them were, and they went down there, and according to Dr. Meldrum, the footprints were on point. They were great. They showed motion. They showed everything. And people said, "Oh, well, he hoaxed that just so Dr. Meldrum would see it." Okay, that's a shot in the dark on an unannounced visit and everything. Who's going to have the wherewithal to go out and fake footprints for an unannounced visit? That's some of the things that we need to look at with these reports. I know the time's about up here, but I could go on forever about this thing's hoaxing and things like that. But like I said, the main thing about hoaxes, if you're doing it, all you're doing is actually hurting honest research. And if you're a researcher and you're hoaxing, you're actually tearing down all of the research that anybody else has ever done. If anybody on here tonight has any questions, I'll give you guys a few minutes to put them up. Here's one. Mick says that was Jeff and his brother, and they went to drop in on Paul on Grover Krantz's recommendation. Yep. So, that's another one too. Grover Krantz, super intelligent guy. Said, I'll give everybody a minute. If you've got any questions, Mick, David, anybody out there, Ray, just go ahead and drop them in the comments here and we'll discuss it. I think probably one of the main things that I wanted to put out in this episode is that on this show, I want to stick to facts. I want to stick to credible research. And even if it does, even if some of the researchers do fall into what you might consider the woo category, or you may not particularly like this person or whatever, I want people that, are actually out there working, boots on the ground, doing stuff, doing hard research, doing real research, doing good research. And my thing is I don't get into a lot of drama. If somebody's going to be a good guest, that's the people that I want. If somebody has something interesting to talk about, that's the people that I want. If somebody has some hard evidence, that's something that I want to discuss, I want to see, I want to talk about. I want to bring it to you guys. if anybody is new into this field and you're just tuning in tonight, the things that I've talked about tonight are kind of my own personal theories, beliefs, things that I do, things that I look for. That is not necessarily 100% the best evidence out there. Okay, Ray says right here, no questions tonight. I'm just participating. I have a lot to learn. Ray, I'll say this. Anybody out there that says they're an expert in Sasquatch don't really know that much about it. There's not that much going on. Mick says no questions tonight, but I like tonight's show. Except for being solo in the forum tonight, although I've got a good 12% beer going. That's always helpful. Loose lips, buddy. That's what I'm talking about. David says, have you heard any credible evidence being verified currently? Right now, Randy Harrington, that was on our show, has some good hair samples that are getting checked right now. And I think really, David, all of us are super excited about the DNA study that's going on. I know I am. I've got some things that I'm kind of looking for in this DNA study that I hope comes out. I'll get into it. I'll tell you straight up. I want to kind of compare what Darby Orcutt comes up with against what Melba Ketchum came up with. Now, I know everybody says that Melba's study was flawed, and yeah, I see exactly what they're talking about. It is flawed, but I do believe that there is a possibility that some of the DNA that we're getting back that says that it's contaminated with human DNA could actually be some type of hybrid between a human and a Sasquatch. Everybody knows that I lean hard into the native stuff because I am part native. And there are a lot of native stories out there about how Sasquatch has taken human women and bred with them. So I'm kind of interested to see how that goes. I know I've heard it said that Darby Orcutt's taken a really long look at this, which I think is a really excellent way of doing things. If you don't take a really long look at physical DNA and things like that we have, then I think we're going to lose some things in translation. So I'm really looking forward to that, see what comes out of that. To see what's coming on. Ray here says, literally in my book, I write my thoughts in completely wrong way. I dealt with it, but I at least humorously honest with it. Ray, I don't know if you remember me, but I met you at the Wood Booger Festival in Norton, and I read your book, just so you know. And yeah, that's a good thing too. That's one thing that I've started doing is I've started taking more notes on my research and things like that. That way I do have things to go back on to see what I've done wrong, to see if I've made any mistakes or anything like that. And I think that's something that every honest researcher should do is take your notes, write it down, things like that. And that's a good way of doing things. Another thing too, while I'm into it, one of the things that I talk about on the show is habituation situations where people do try to habituate with Sasquatch. And I'm a flesh and blood thing. That's kind of my thing. And with that being said, I try to relate these habituation situations with Sasquatch to habituation with a known animal. I'm going to use a black bear. With the black bear, in a habituation situation where people especially use food as the catalyst for these habituations. I think that that could go wrong really quickly for a lot of different reasons. One would be uh, if something was to happen, if you was to leave or be gone for a while or something like that, these animals become dependent upon the food that you leave out for them, and without that food, they fall into a calorie deficit, and no animal can survive in a calorie deficit, and that goes with people too. So if you're using food as a catalyst, keep that in mind. It could turn bad when that food is not there. Animals are drawn into that food that's left out because that is easy calories. It's just laying there for them. They come in, they take it, nothing else. So they're not out there actually working to try to feed themselves. Why would I work and try to feed myself when there's food laying right here all the time? And when that food's not there, that's when you get rogue bears and things like that, which I think that's very possible with Sasquatch because, you're take the difference between a bear and a Sasquatch, it could be a very dangerous situation. Sasquatch, I can kind of throw some humor into it, but, you're dealing with something that can rip your arm off and beat you to death with a wet end. So that's something about these habituation situations. Okay, Mick says right here, I'll bring this up. I have serious reservations with anyone who claims to have had multiple encounters with Sasquatch, and that includes habituations. Worst case scenario, siege at Honobia in Oklahoma. Yeah, that's that's my thing. And I'll just be honest. I would love to have multiple encounters with Sasquatch. I've had multiple encounters with Sasquatch, but it's over several years in different places. I had my own encounter here, not a half a mile from where I'm sitting at right now. I can look out this window right here up onto the ridge to where I had my encounter. I've had encounters here in Virginia. I've had encounters in West Virginia with some eye shine and some other things that I can't explain. But the siege of Novia, that went really bad really quick. And I'm just going to say this, if you're having Bigfoot activity to the point that you've got to have 6 or 8 people sitting on top of a roof with shotguns to try to defend yourself, that's not a good way. That's not a good way to go. Yeah, I can see multiple encounters. Mick, I'm going to say I can kind of deal with multiple encounters better than I can with the habituations. Because I'm just going to be honest, I can go out and pour out 50 pounds of corn tonight and say I poured that out for Bigfoot. Now I go out there tomorrow morning and there's not 1 grain of corn left. And I can tell everybody, yeah, Bigfoot came in and it ate a 50-pound bag of corn. But when you get down to it, when you look around that corn pile, there's deer tracks everywhere. You don't have one Bigfoot track, but there's deer tracks everywhere. More than likely something else is eating that corn. And I think, a lot of people that do these gifting stations with food, that's what happens, is something else just came in and taken that food. Now, I'm not saying that's every instance. I'm just saying that's probably some instances. And one other thing, too, I know I'm long-winded and I apologize. Nobody wants to tune in and just see me talk. But one of the things that I kind of want to talk about, too, is the missing 411 situations. I've said it a few times on the show. I don't necessarily believe that all of these disappearances in these national forests and parks and things like that are Sasquatch related. I don't think they are. I think there's a small percentage that are. I think it's, a very small percentage. But there is a possibility that, that happens. I've heard several reports of people, who talk about little children. Bigfoot was pecking on their window and waving at them and things like that, trying to get them to come outside or come to the window. So that's a possibility. It could happen. I was actually trying to watch a documentary on YouTube today, and I think her name was Teresa Bayer, who disappeared. She was 16 years old, and there was a Sasquatch researcher that was with her, and he said Sasquatch took her. And I think there is a possibility that could happen, but it's not 100%. Everybody that disappears in these national parks is taken by Bigfoot. I think a lot of people that disappear in these national parks fall victim to themselves. They're ill prepared. I'll go back to the 2 researchers that died last year, right around Christmas, who were hit with a snowstorm and they were not prepared for it, and they ended up freezing to death. Another thing, too, is a lot of these missing people happen around scree fields where there's boulders and things that came off the mountain, or, they could be anywhere from the size of a truck to the size of a basketball or even smaller. And I think that maybe some of these people that disappear around these scree fields have maybe fallen into a void in the scree field and just haven't been found yet. Mixes. Okay, I'm gonna bring that up, Mick. That's a good one. I've seen some weird things in places where few men have been, if any, and only once did I ever have what I suspected to be a Sasquatch encounter. Problem is, it's too far up north in Canada to go back. I think that happens a lot. When you say I've been someplace that few men have ever been, people say, "Oh, that's BS." The world is too advanced for that. That's not true. There are wild places everywhere on this planet, and there are places where few modern men have ever been. I'm not going to rule out, the possibility that there's places that there's probably never been people. But, when you get into that, that kind of falls along with what I'm saying. You get up in these places where there is little to no activity of humans and something happens to you. That's the end of the game. Nobody knows where you're at. Nobody's going to find you. You could have passed away natural causes. Dehydration. I think dehydration plays a lot into this missing 411 things. And I think a lot of it is a lot of people, when they go out hunting, a lot of these hunters end up in these missing 411 situations. I think a lot of it is these guys go to these deer camps, and there's a lot of drinking that goes on there, and maybe even some herbal usage and things like that. And, they get dehydrated. And then they go out and hike 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 miles in search of the perfect spot where nobody's ever been to find the biggest buck that's ever lived in, the U.S., Canada, Alaska, wherever. And you get out there and you're dehydrated. You become disoriented. You might try to hike back to camp and end up walking 10, 12 miles in the opposite direction. So now you're stuck out in the wilderness, have to spend the night. You've got no food, no water, no nothing with you. You dehydrate even further, which leads to more confusion, which leads to you getting lost more. And in certain cases, people will start to shed things like their clothes. They'll take off their clothes and fold them up and lay them down and just walk away from them. That's the thing. And David brings up a good point here. If I can bring it up, I'm having some trouble here. Expect to self-rescue. That's the thing. You're not always going to be able to self-rescue. That's the thing. Oh, that's cool. Mick says that when he had that encounter up there, the incident was in northern Canada, happening when he was on a survival course with the Canadian forces. I'm just going to tell you, I've never been to Canada, Mick. I'd love to go one of these days. Canada has got a lot of wild places in it. A lot of wild places. It's one of these areas, where there is places that honestly no modern human has been. And it's when you get out there in that type of environment, you are truly 100% on your own. And, I've done some survival work, some survival schools and studies and things like that. And, when you're out there like that, and I mean out there, whether it's in Canada, whether it's here in the US, wherever, you don't know what you're going to encounter. You have to be prepared. And especially that's one thing with the military that's different from hunters and things like that is the military will set you up for success. Whereas as an individual, you may not have the resources. Mick brought up he was dropped off with a helicopter. And I'm pretty sure that, they probably had the grid coordinates and everything else like that where you was at. Yeah. Mick says over 90% of the population in Canada lives within 100 miles of the Canada-U.S. border. Yeah, there's a lot of wild places in Canada. But with the military, like I said, you're set up for success. You have things. Number one, you have training. Number two, you may not have a great quantity of it, but you're going to have food, water, and some type of shelter materials. You're going to have things like a knife, clothing that's, appropriate for the environment. You're probably going to have a little bit of food with you, cordage, things like that most people do not have the wherewithal to pack with them. But yeah, the Helo in thing, that's serious business. But like I said, the military sets you up so you can succeed. Now, if you're a deer hunter, you're probably not going to have all of that stuff. You may have a knife with you that's appropriate for skinning a buck, maybe gutting the animal after you take it, butchering or whatever. In that kind of situation, you may not have like an appropriate survival knife. I know a lot of guys carry, I think it's called a Wyoming knife, that is just a hook blade for kind of gutting the animal. And that's all you got. On the other end, there's a razor that you can use for skinning, but you don't have anything that you can use to cut firewood, to make a spark to get a fire going or anything like that. So, when you get into these remote areas, be prepared. Have food with you. Take the proper clothes. Have good shoes. Good socks. Good socks is something that's overlooked by just about everybody that goes out into the forest. Good socks, good gloves, a good toboggan. I don't know what they call it in Canada. Around here, the kind of the redneck term for it, we call it a boggin. Some type of ski hat, whatever you want to call it, watch cap, skull cap. A good toboggan, keep your head warm. Keep that, thermal layer going. But that's the thing. And when you're out looking for Bigfoot, another thing too is I want to kind of express this is that everything that you see, hear, or smell is not Sasquatch. You might have the sulfur smell that's associated with Sasquatch quite a bit. And it could be just natural sulfur coming up through a creek, something in a stream. You might hear something that you might think is Sasquatch. It may just be an animal call that you're not familiar with. You may have a sighting of what you think is Bigfoot. Without that evidence, footprints, whatever, it's hard to say really, what it is. So always keep, that evidence in mind. Everything that you see, hear, or smell is not necessarily Bigfoot. And I think a lot of young researchers fall into that trap where everything that they do hear, see, or smell is Bigfoot related. You have to have an open mind. But with that being said, you've got to be skeptical to a point. If you're not skeptical to a point, then you're really not researching. You're just running around the woods, willy-nilly. Everything is Bigfoot. So try to keep in mind when you're looking for things, you're looking for, like I said, the hardcore evidence, footprints, hair samples, a good sighting that has footprints or hair samples with it. Realistically, if you could get 3 points with a Bigfoot sighting, that is like a perfect sighting. A photograph, a footprint, hair samples, all from the same sighting. Excellent. Thermal video, whatever, audio and a thermal video. If you can get 3 points, that would be perfect. But that's not always going to be the case. But if you could get those 3, that is, almost, and I don't want to say, really don't like to say this, but that's almost definitive evidence that it's out there. Try to keep in mind, too, that what you might consider definitive evidence may not necessarily be definitive evidence. It all depends entirely upon the context. We have a huge body of evidence out there, and it's all considered circumstantial, footprints, hair samples, things like that. So let's try to keep all that in mind. And I'm kind of over time here, but I'm going to log off here, guys. I appreciate everybody that comes on. I appreciate the comments, appreciate our regular viewers, everybody in the chat. I do this show for you guys. This show is set up for you all. Whether you're a new researcher, whether you've been researching for 30 years, whatever, I want to bring something new to this field. I want to bring the truth. I want to bring honesty, and I want to bring integrity to it. I want everybody to feel welcome on this show. And just so you guys know, this is 100% for you. The only thing that is, critical in this is that we all stick together. We all work together to come together as one and find that critical evidence. If we can get that, like I said last week, if we can get that laser point down instead of circling around the edge, if we could all come down to that laser point, we could prove the existence of this creature, whether it be natural, whether it be interdimensional or whatever, whether it be spiritual. If we could all come together, we can get it. And with that being said, guys, I appreciate everybody. Good night.
Thanks for tuning in to Sasquatch Watch Radio. We truly appreciate each and every one of you. Stay connected. Don't miss our next exciting show, airing next Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. To stay updated, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'd also love for you to join our Facebook page at facebook.com/Sasquatch Watch Radio and check out our website at squatchradio.com. beyondbigfoot.com. Share your stories and feedback. Your feedback means the world to us, so please give us a thumbs up on our shows and let us know what you think. Have you had an encounter? If you've had a sighting or encounter, we want to hear from you. Reach out to us through our website, YouTube channel, or Facebook page. And if you're interested in being a guest on our podcast, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next Monday night.